Welcome to Backseat Directing,
where we talk about movies, TV shows, comics, and more.
We're your hosts,
Andrew
and Aaron.
We produce new episodes every Monday and Thursday.
And on this episode, we're going over our best movie of 2022, The Batman.
3, 2, 1, action.
Let's turn the lights back on.
Something in the way. I gotta be careful when I sing on camera, because then I know that you're gonna put it in the episode somehow.
Yeah. Okay. I can see you now.
I just had the urge to sing again.
All right, Andrew. Last week, we did an episode, or we recorded an episode where we went over all the best movies of 2022, some of the worst movies as well, and all that. But we came to the consensus that both of our favorite favorite movie is The Batman. So we thought, what better way to kick off 2023 than talking about said movie?
Yeah, I guess for me, this is kind of the movie to beat for 2023. It was both of our favorite movie of the year last year. Held that gold medal for both of us. So it's something we both love, that I've been really passionate for us to talk about, and I wanted us to do it justice. So I tried to do as much research as possible, even having like a busy week and all the New Year's parties and everything. So hopefully we'll get to say everything that we want to.
Yeah, we talked about this movie in like pieces of some other episodes, one of which being like our favorite comic book movies, which was one of our first episodes, but we haven't really mentioned the movie in depth at all since it's come out. So now that it's been almost a year, there's a lot of stuff that has come out about the movie and stuff that we can kind of dive in, like the behind the scenes stuff, which is where I want to kind of take this conversation more so. And you have like a cool idea of how to introduce the actual story of the movie and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to finally have this episode with you.
Yeah, our plan for this episode, what you can expect as a listener, is first we're going to go over our usual route, talking about the summary, talking about ratings, reviews, the earnings of the movie, and we're going to go over the plot in terms of relationships to and introductions to the different characters in the movie as they're introduced. Since it's been a year since it's come out, I figure most people would have seen it. I've seen it 3 times now. Which usually I wouldn't have seen a movie that many times if it's only been out for a year, but this is a really great movie. But then after that, we're going to kind of go into some of our things we would change about the movie, maybe some little nitpicks here and there. We're going to talk about, we're also going to talk about the source material. We're going to bring back our source code segment that we haven't really touched on in a little while. And then we're going to close out somewhat with some behind the scenes, some fun facts, some backseat directing, and what we would change about the movie. So that's what's on the docket. The order might be a little different than what I just discussed, but that's what you can expect to hear. I'm really excited to talk about it, but now that you've had a year to digest it and seen it 3 times, what do you think about the movie?
So when I first saw the movie, we saw it in theaters together, and we saw it at a theater that's like 40 minutes away from my house, so I kind of got to dwell on the movie as I was driving home and stuff. And when I got home and my wife asked me, what did I think of the movie? How was it? Because she wasn't able to come. I was like, it was good. It was good. I'm still kind of digesting the movie. And the further that I got away from actually watching it, the more and more I wanted to see it again. And the more and more that I developed liking it, and started to kind of love the style and the cinematography, the acting, the story, the set design. Like it all like really grew on me really fast after that first watch. And we talked about on our last episode, the recap of 2022, that something that's a high marker of what makes a good movie for me is rewatchability. And if there's any movie this year that I could sit down and rewatch, it would be this one. This would be the first one on my list. I watched it, and so did you, this week in preparation for today, and I was very happy to do so.
Yeah, just I was a little bit different than you. I actually walked out the door of the theater completely ready to just turn around, do 180, and watch the movie again back to back.
High praise, very fast.
Yeah, this is the kind of Batman movie that I've been waiting for because I love the Arkham video games and I love Batman as a detective, and I've always wanted them to do a serial killer story because I'm fascinated by serial killers like a lot of the public as well. That's why we have so many documentaries about them. So this is what I was hoping for, is like cat and mouse, Batman using his detective abilities to chase a serial killer, and that's what I've wanted them to make for so long. So when I heard that was Matt Reeves' idea for this movie, a serial killer Riddler, I was so excited, and I love the execution. This is the only movie in my lifetime that I've gone back to see in theaters by myself. I've never gone to see. It's a kind of a strange experience to go see a movie by yourself. For me, I don't think that's like unique. I think probably a lot of people go see movies by themselves, but this is the only movie I've done it for.
To go with you all the time.
I had nobody interested in going to see this movie again because it was 3 hours long. So I just went and watched it again by myself because I had to see it. And
if you go by yourself, you can watch it as a matinee. It's cheaper. You still have the rest of your day afterwards.
Yeah, I did. I watched it at like midday. It was a nearly empty theater. There was like 3 of us in there.
I don't think I've ever gone to the theaters by myself.
Yeah, I didn't think about it until I went and saw this movie again. And
I think if we were to actually get one of those theater packages where we can kind of go watch a limited amount of movies a month or whatever, I think I would go by myself more often.
It's a worthwhile experience because you focus on the movie. Like I'm kind of drawn to like comment on different scenes if there's a friend sitting next to me. Like I'll lean over to you and tell you, oh, like that's a reference to this comic that I've actually read. But this is just nothing but focus, which is probably how movies are meant to be enjoyed.
Yeah. Ready to kind of dive into the summary and then start breaking down the movie?
Yeah, Aaron, what happened in the Batman 2022?
So, a young Bruce Wayne has patrolled the streets of Gotham as Batman for 2 years now. He's encountered a worthy opponent when the serial killer known as the Riddler appears, leaving riddles at the scene of every crime. A cat and mouse game ensues with which weaves Batman between Gotham's criminal underbelly and its elected officials. Throughout this investigation, Bruce learns what it means to be a hero. Very nice.
That doesn't give too much away. From here on out, just a fair warning. It might take a minute for us to get into it, but we are going to spoil the plot of the Batman.
Definitely.
Definitely watch this movie. Don't let us ruin it for you, but it's a great movie. Hopefully most people have seen it by now.
Yes, for sure. So let's kind of dive into the ratings here. We got, this movie was obviously made last year, 2022. It's weird to say last year. It's only January 2nd.
To us, it's the 2nd. This will be coming out later.
But this will be coming out on Thursday, so in just a few days. But the rating is PG-13. It's 2 hours and 56 minutes long. Like you said, it's a 3-hour movie. It's a long movie. You got to invest your time if you're going to go watch this movie. And then the IMDb rating is a 7.8 out of 10, which The Dark Knight is a 9 out of 10. So maybe in my opinion, a little low. I don't know if there's that big of a difference between the two, especially like you said that before we started recording too. The tomato meter for the critics is an 85% on Rotten Tomatoes, and then an 87% as the audience score.
Yeah, I think that I'd agree with you that it's a little low. For my personal ratings, I wouldn't put The Dark Knight at a 9 either. I would put both of these at least a 9.0 for me. But I think I would have expected this movie to be at least an 8.5 on IMDb from like the general public. I know I got my personal bias. Yeah. That might make it a little bit higher because I love Batman. I love superhero movies. But, it'll come to be appreciated in its time. But
The budget for this movie is kind of the average of these superhero movies now, is $200 million. And it grossed worldwide $770.8 million. So it brought in a good amount of money for Warner Brothers, enough to allow them to make a Batman 2.
Yeah. Also, like we've talked about before, it's a little bit harder for movies that are this long, 3 hours plus, to make as much money because longer movies have they have less show times they can fit into a single day, and they're selling them for the same price per ticket, whether it's an hour and a half or 3 hours long. Mm-hmm. So it kind of affects their box office. But I've seen comments about this movie saying that it truly feels like they made this with artistic vision first, and profitability falling behind that, which is really refreshing, especially in the superhero genre. So I'm glad that they put everything they wanted to put in the movie. I wish it was a little bit shorter, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, so I have some more stuff to kind of comment about how long it is and whatnot, but let's get into the creators of this movie. Who acted in it? Who made this movie? How did this movie come to be? Andrew?
So behind the camera, we have, on that side of things, we have Matt Reeves, Greg Fraiser, and Michael Giacchino are the people I want to talk about. The director, Matt Reeves, he is also known for directing both War of Planet of the Apes and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, as well as Cloverfield. I say those are his other biggest films. But the Batman, to me, just kind of like shatters through the ceiling for him. And this is really game-changing. I could see him being one of my favorite directors in the future. But I really, really love his work on this movie. And he wrote for the movie as well. There's a team of writers, I think 2 or 3 individuals, and then also credited on IMDb are the creators of the character Batman, Bob Kane and Bill Finger. But it seems like the bulk of the writing was done by him. A lot of my information today is going to come from behind the scenes featurette that is on the Blu-ray disc for the Batman. You can watch it on YouTube. It's called The Making of Vengeance. It's about an hour long. And Matt Reeves, when he talks about, he'll often, when he's being interviewed, will say like, when I came up with the idea of the bat symbol being, well, he worked with them in contingency with the designers to pick the bat symbol, but that's a bad example. So he'll say like, when I came up with the concept of him walking the streets as the drifter, I connected that to say Batman Year One, he says. So like he'll say I a lot. So it seems like he did the bulk of the writing with maybe some assistance. Yeah. And so he's kind of like we said before, he's the architect and the foreman of this movie, being the writer and director.
Which I think is the ingredients for the best movie possible. Right, no matter what movie it is, when the writer is the director, it seems like the movie gets made the way that it was supposed to be made most of the time. You know, like we talked about before, like it's got to be weird to be the writer and then to have someone else execute your vision.
Yeah, for someone else to like facilitate what you imagined. It's interesting. I'm glad that it went this way because his mind really went the route that like I feel like my mind goes to when I wanted to see a Batman movie of that like this movie. So when I talk about inspirations for this movie, and you can hear Matt Reeves talk about this too, but he's clearly inspired by, in comics, The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, and Batman Year One by Miller and Mazzucchelli. And then for movies, it feels like a blend between a superhero movie with the movie Seven by David Fincher, and then it also feels like there's some Taxi Driver in there by Scorsese. So it's a character piece. You get that like that in-depth character study from Taxi Driver. You get these like noir, investigative, serial killer elements from Seven. The like slow played story that still keeps you drawn in and tugging at the line of the mystery, and the dark elements of just the shadowy, dark, realistic crime scenes coming from Seven. He really pulled it all together with this, and he's definitely one of the MVPs of this production. The movie works because of him. But then moving on to cinematographer Greg Fraiser, he'll be known for his cinematography work on Dune, Vice, Rogue One, Zero Dark 30, and Killing Them Softly. He's got a lot of credits, and his movies are absolutely stunning and beautiful. I want to stop for a moment at our cinematographer to talk about the shots in this film. Is there anything that like certain scenes that jumped out at you, or anything that any comments you have on the cinematography?
All of it. I love it. They used anamorphic lenses, which I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I guess I can bring it up now, which is not uncommon. A lot of sci-fi, kind of big production studios and movies and stuff use anamorphic lenses. But what Matt Reeves did, and the other producers and stuff of Batman, is that they went out and looked for old anamorphic lenses that were almost borderline broken and not up to the typical standard that a high production movie like this would use. And they would go up to Matt Reeves and be like, look, like these lenses, like they're kind of like old and they're more distorted than normal and all that stuff. And he's like, perfect. You know, like I want the flaws and stuff in the shots. I want the kind of texture that brings.
Interesting.
Now, when I was doing research for this movie, I kind of went down like this rabbit hole of what an anamorphic lens is, because I've heard of it before. I had an idea of what it does. You know, the first thing that comes to mind is like the lens flares that you see. Typically, they're like blue horizontal streaks that go across, like when you see a little thing of light. Like the first movie that comes to mind would be like Star Trek, or Transformers is a big one that has those like streaks. But I was like, there's got to be more to those lenses than just those lens flares. So I kind of dived in a little bit deeper of these lenses, and we're kind of going out of order of our episode here, but that's okay. So here's kind of the comparison between an anamorphic and a spherical lens. Now, a spherical lens is the common lens. You know, it's like what most people think of when you say like a camera lens. It's what we're filming on right now. It's what your phone's lens is. It's basically just like the name says, the lens is spherical. It's a circle. And then an anamorphic lens, the difference, like when you pick it up, is that lens opening is a oval shape. And what that oval shape does is it compresses the image, which makes it take up the full sensor that the camera has. And it like compresses that image, because what a spherical is doing is it's on the lens sensor, but it's only taking up that middle strip of it. But this will compress the image to where it's all a square. Okay? And back in the day, before they had computers and stuff, they would put an anamorphic lens on the projector to stretch back out the image. So they would film it with the anamorphic lens, which compresses everything, gets you more information than what you would normally get. And then they put anamorphic lens on the projector to stretch it back out so you could watch this super wide shot with all this information.
That cinematic kind of widescreen feeling.
Right, exactly. So now that part is done in like post-production editing process where they stretch it out. Now, what are some other differences between these lenses other than just like that compression? Like what are the results of that? Well, the bokeh is more circular on the spherical lens and more oval on the anamorphic lens, which makes sense, right? Because that's the shape of the lens. Now, bokeh is when the image behind what's in focus or in front of what's in focus is very blurred and out of focus. So like lights would kind of shine and have this either spherical glow or this oval glow.
Wow, that's really noticeable in a lot of the shots in the movie, like especially where they want you to focus on the Batman, because you have to be drawn into like what you can see on his face, which is where the acting and the jawline acting and the visual eye acting for Pattison comes into play. There's one shot where he's hanging, do you remember at the end, off of like a railing, and he's about to fall into the water as the Gotham Square Garden's flooding with water, and it's exactly what you're talking about with the bokeh, where it's like portrait mode on your phone. It's so focused, and the water behind him is just complete blur.
That's exactly what portrait mode is. Portrait mode is trying to fake that compression and fake the aperture, which is the f-stop, which is how much that lens is open. But yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Pulls the focus of your eye line really well.
Now, the anamorphic lenses have more of like this barrel distortion. So like the farther away you get from the center, on the sides and even on the top, it kind of loses focus and kind of goes into that blurry bokeh on its own. And your spherical lens is very crisp and a little bit more sharp than the anamorphic lens. Now, another difference is when they rack focus, which is where if me and you are sitting here and the camera's behind you and you're in focus, racking focus would be when they change that focus to me, and then now you're blurry and I'm in focus. When you do that on an anamorphic lens, it makes the different objects kind of seem like they're shrinking and growing rather than just like you're looking here to looking there. It's you're getting bigger and they're getting smaller, or vice versa. They look like they're getting bigger as you look like you're getting smaller. So it has a more filmistic look to it. It looks like artistic. It looks
cinematic.
Yes. Some would say cinematic. Sure, definitely. It's more stylized.
Yeah.
A standard lens is more sharp. It's more similar to like how your eyes would pick up things. You know, like we're not just seeing bokeh with our eyes, of course, but like everything's in focus.
Maybe you're not.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't speak to what I can do.
Yeah. But like everything's in focus, you know, or at least is sharp, even if it is like in the background blurred and stuff. So just the fact that they were like, let's take these anamorphic lenses, but then let's take almost faulty lenses to give it even more kind of grit and characteristic and kind of style to it.
Yeah, that's what I want out of a cinematographer, right? Is like if you hand me a random frame of that movie for me to be like, wow, that feels like the Batman. Like I don't recognize that shot of like, it's maybe just a ground shot of somebody's feet walking and but it still feels like that movie. That is like such a strength to that movie to recognize it in your gut.
Yeah, and before we move on, I want to give source credit to where it's due of where I got all of this information about these lenses. And if you want to learn more, you can go to the source and they can probably do a better explanation of what I just did.
I thought yours was great.
Thank you. So if you want to look up this video that I looked at, it's by Studio Binder. It's called What is an Anamorphic Lens? Anamorphic Lens versus Spherical Lens. So look that up on YouTube and you can kind of learn even more because they go in a lot of depth about what these lenses are and what kind of mood each lens creates. And when you're listening to the anamorphic lens description, it's literally describing the Batman, which is really cool.
So my thoughts on the cinematography, the overarching thought would be the movie does a really good job of manipulating what we see and what we don't see. I know a lot of people complain about the movie being too dark, but the absence or presence of light in the movie is very manipulative to our eyes as the audience and controls what we focus on and controls like what information we're privy to from the scene. If they want Batman to feel like the boogeyman, then he's encapsulated in darkness and we can't see him, or we only see him in a frame.
Or he's blurry.
Yeah.
He's out of focus.
Yeah. And I think that is amazing. It never bothered me from the first time I watched it, the amount of darkness in the movie. So
Never.
I think it was really
much
cool
like our
and
intro
unique.
to this episode.
Which is our absence of light, because we're such artistic filmmakers. But I thought that was very interesting, and I want to talk about his work with the volume, but maybe if we have time in our behind the scenes information. The volume is really interesting for filmmaking. So then moving on to music, which is by Michael Giacchino, and I don't think we've had a bad Batman score ever. They all sound great, but this one is so perfectly in tone and fitting to this movie. And if I could go on and on and on with Michael Giacchino's list of credits, I'll give you a few. He composed for Up, he composed for Ratatouille, Star Trek, Lightyear, Thor: Love and Thunder. He composed for all
the music in that movie was fine. It's the movie that wasn't good, all right?
He composed for the Spider-Man theme for all of Tom Holland's movies, which sounds so great. Those big, loud tones, like the brass, sounds so good. He composed for the Jurassic World movies, which is tough to follow up John Williams with the original Jurassic Park, right? And then he composed for both Incredibles and Inside Out. And he also recently directed, which it wasn't his directorial debut, but I'd say it's the biggest. He only has 3 director credits, and he directed the short feature film of Werewolf by Night. He did the music for it as well, which is kind of get a 2-in-1 when you have him directing the movie. But that was successful and well received too. So his music is so amazing. I can't say my favorite Batman theme because of the time period where The Dark Knight came out. Hans Zimmer Batman theme will always be my favorite because of my childhood. But this one is just such a technical, beautiful masterclass of composing, and like the brooding like swell of music that like you just feel it in your chest. Like it's like incredible that like I said, Batman
definitely encapsulates this version of Batman for sure.
It has a little bit of like a horror feeling to it, like this movie does, like a thriller feeling, I should say, more so than horror, but it's so amazing and bombastic. But going into our cast, this is now the other side of the camera. Who's in front of the camera? We have Robert Pattinson as Batman / Bruce Wayne, Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman / Selena Kyle, Paul Dano as the Riddler, or in this movie, I believe Edward Nashton would be the other name. Comic books, he'd be considered Edward Nygma. And then Colin Farrell as Oswald Cobblepot, or the Penguin, or Oz in this movie, they often call him. So phenomenal in this movie. John Turturro as Falcone, Jeffrey Wright as Lieutenant James Gordon, Andy Serkis as Alfred Pennyworth, and Jamie Lawson as Bella Real. And there's some other actors in the movie as well. It's a really big cast, but these I would consider the core members. Who are you most impressed with?
So I think heading into the movie, everyone was very judgmental of them casting Robert Pattinson.
Which people always are.
Yeah, like whenever the Batman is announced of who's going to act it, it's a big deal, you know. But I haven't really seen a lot of his films or anything, you know, and like the only thing I've really known him from was Twilight, which is not a good example of what could be for Batman. And I think that's where a lot of people's concerns were. But there's a lot of maturity in his acting and a lot of depth, or what am I trying to say? Where he can act on like a lot of different spectrums. You know,
okay.
He has
range.
That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. So I really enjoyed him as Batman, and we didn't get to see a lot of his Bruce Wayne. And I think a lot of people, that's some of the negative reviews of this movie is Bruce Wayne, which we'll get into when we break down the story. I liked it. I think it leaves room for character development and growth for the next movie. And I really enjoyed that this movie was a Batman movie first and more of a Bruce Wayne origin, where he's having trouble balancing the two. And right now he's out of balance, leaning heavily towards the Batman side of his persona, his personality, you know?
Yeah, we'll get into it more too. I think my nitpicks will be a good segue to talk about the public perception of his Bruce Wayne. Yeah. But I think under the cowl, he just does such a phenomenal job of acting with just his physical acting. Like the physical acting is a huge thing that people don't always focus on. Movement, the body motions, the movement, the speed, and the speed and intention with which he moves, the acting of his jawline, and his acting with his eyes. Oh my gosh, you're able to take so much from such a small fragment of his face with the work of his eyes, and you know, it's really phenomenal.
It almost reminds me of like a wild cat or something, where they move very stealth, very slow, but then at any moment they can strike and it's like lightning speed, you know, like just the force behind his punches and stuff, and then like how he like goes back to being very stoic and stuff. Very good.
Let's and this is a good segue into us getting into talking about our characters. So let's get into the character of the Batman, how the movie presents him, and what we think about it.
Before we do so, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has supported the podcast, who's listening to this episode, who's listened to other episodes. We're very grateful for your support as we try to build this community up.
Thank you so much. All right, now let's get into our characters. So I'm actually going to start with the Riddler, because that's the first character in the movie, the first main character in the movie that we're introduced to.
Yeah.
And the beautiful opening shot of the movie is through the POV of the binoculars. So the movie has a trend or a theme of POV shots, whether there's two shots through the binoculars, there's overhead POVs on the motorcycle, there's POVs as he's jumping off of the building, and it's showing us, whether it's POV facing his face or overhead showing us him gliding down to the ground. I think that goes big into like putting us in the shoes of the characters. And the movie, even behind the scenes, in the featurette, they talk about how Matt Reeves is very character focused and character driven, and that's to me the number one thing in a movie.
Yeah, and those shots were very intentional by him. He said that he really wanted those. He's asking his camera crew, like, where is every possible place that I can put a camera? You know, especially like on the car and stuff for that car chase and whatnot.
And Zoe Kravitz talks a lot about too how this movie plays on the gray areas of humanity. Mm-hmm. So that's where the opening shot comes in, of putting us in the shoes of the Riddler, because as we get into the Riddler's motivations, we'll find out that he is somebody who's deeply troubled and been deeply wronged by the system, the corrupt system of Gotham. So we can be in his shoes and sympathize with him, even though he might be a serial killer. That's what a powerful film does, is make us maybe feel pity momentarily, where we catch ourselves and say, hold on, this is a villain. We should be hating him right now.
It also helps us connect with him because he's fighting for a cause that does need to be fixed.
Yes.
He's fighting for something that is wrong, that needs to be corrected. He's just going about it in
the wrong way.
Yeah, in the wrong way.
Essentially, I see the Riddler, Catwoman, and Batman on similar missions, fighting for their own kind of justice in different ways. You know, you've got Batman on the one end, Riddler on the other, and Catwoman somewhere in between.
Yeah,
and
you can even argue that Batman's view is wrong as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, in that sense, maybe even way next to Batman is like a Commissioner Gordon or like Martinez, like a cop who is a just, non-corrupt cop, you know?
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. They start out with us in the shoes of the Riddler. That's where they choose to open their movie. A powerful statement, right? Putting us in his literal perspective. And that shot gives us so much of the information that we need for the movie, where we see the elected official, Mayor Don Mitchell, who's, you know, going against Bella Real in the re-election, and it shows us his family. He's got kind of this cute dynamic with his son, and then it shows the size and scope of the building too, just to show his wealth. And then it shows the roof, the skylight where he enters. So if you're following the movie, the next shot after that is looking down through that skylight with it cracked open, giving us all the information we need to know. How did the Riddler get inside? You know, there is a monster inside the house to be afraid of. And then when they finally reveal him out of the shadows standing behind Mayor Don Mitchell, it's with this approach that is very much in the way of a serial killer movie, like I said, a David Fincher approach. And he is quietly, calmly waiting in the darkness, but when he attacks him, he unleashes like this guttural scream. So it tells us a lot about the character, about Paul Dano's Riddler, that he is intelligent, patient. He's planned this attack. He has a weapon. You know, there's basically, when you look at serial killers, there's the ones that are crimes of passion, and there's ones that plan. And this is a sadistic, tormented man who planned, brought a weapon in advance, surveilled the location, and snuck in. Tells us a lot about him, but the way he releases that guttural scream also tells us that this is deeply personal.
Yeah,
you know,
and the fact that he did it with his hands, basically, you know, with just that weapon. Like, he didn't just shoot him from the distance.
It's emotional to him. He's
he could have just
crime.
Sniper shot him from the roof that we saw with the binoculars, but he wanted to be up close and personal. Like
he says later in the movie, his strengths are in his brain. It's not physical, but he still makes a point of going after these people when he physically can, because he is emotionally connected to his crimes, because of his upbringing in his childhood and the way he feels he's personally been wronged. So very interesting, a lot to be unpacked in that introduction later when we come back to the crime scene. But then after we're introduced to the Riddler, we are then introduced to our protagonist, the Batman, and in such an interesting fashion. It's my favorite introduction of the Batman. It's possibly my favorite introduction of any character in a movie ever. Because
I have that written on my notes too. Best live action intro to Batman I've ever seen.
I mean,
it's amazing.
It's not just the scene of him walking out of the darkness in the subway. It's everything. It's the narration. It's the music. It's the way that they convince us as the audience that he is in every shadow, because that puts us in the shoes of the criminals of Gotham. The idea that he's in every shadow and lurking and behind every corner is instilled into us as the audience, because the filmmakers convince us he's in the shadows, and he's gonna get the guy who just robbed the convenience store. He's gonna get the people who are vandalizing the courtroom, and then when he finally steps out of the actual shadows, it's that boogeyman factor that we keep talking about. It tells us so much about his character, to me, the way that he slowly walks out of the shadows. This isn't a Batman that took every tactical advantage he possibly could. He didn't set traps, and he didn't come at them from overhead. He stepped out of the shadows and said, "Here I am. What are you going to do about it?" There's like he says later in the film, he has no fear for himself. This tells us this is a Batman without fear. This is a Batman who wants to strike fear. And the way he steps out, the way the sound design of the movie, the Foley artists have his steps in the rain, It just has the feeling like he's so much larger than life. Like he might as well have rolled out in a tank. I feel like he was so menacing and threatening. It's such a great introduction to him.
And the voiceover is the perfect counterpart to the visuals that we're seeing.
Yeah, the voice is so soft, I feel like.
Yeah, it's soft, but it's explaining what you're seeing, but it's giving you a little bit more into the character. You know, like
I love voiceover work.
Yeah, it's really good. And I love too how they brought the voiceover back into why we're hearing the voiceover when they show him writing it in his diary.
Yeah.
You know, and that connection made it for me feel like a comic book.
It's also another connection to Mazzucchelli and Miller's Year One, right? Because there's kind of a diary aspect to that comic book.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going. Like in comic books, when there's a lot of action and stuff, Invincible does this really well. When they're going through fights, there's still a lot of dialogue going on, maybe more so than like what's in a movie. And it was cool. When I was watching this again yesterday, like I could see the little square text boxes come up in my head as he's talking, as if it was like a comic book.
That's great.
You know, because like a comic book, if the character is talking but he's not in the panel, it's like a square box. And like in my head, I could envision that. So it felt like it was just coming right from the page, which was really cool.
But also there's a lot of parallels to our introduction to the Riddler, because when Batman steps out slow and controlled with intention, but then when he unleashes himself on the first criminal, it is with a brutality and rage that is like deeply personal. And Pattison talks about this in the featurette, that he felt like when he was Batman taking on these criminals, that he felt like every night he was going out, he was kind of reliving the death of his parents, and that connected the journey of Batman like emotionally to these random strangers, these criminals that he's fighting.
He's
that
doing
made
this
it
for
personal.
himself. He's not doing it to be a hero.
Even the line, "I'm vengeance." Vengeance is personal. Vengeance is him taking matters into his own, his own hands. Yeah. It's not this true crusader of Gotham that we might come to see by the end of the film or future films. And I think that personal nature and that personal, the violence and the brutality that goes into this, it kind of shows you his faults, and it ties him in even more so with the villain of the story, who are kind of foils to each other the whole movie, like mirroring one another.
And him saying I'm vengeance is from the animated series as well.
Yeah, so it's also a line.
I think
to
as
the
we're
comics.
going through the story, we could kind of plug in a little bit of source code as we go.
Yeah.
Rather than backtracking. But yeah, like in the animated series, he says, "I'm vengeance," and then I think he says, "I'm darkness. I'm Batman."
I am the night.
Yeah.
I am Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kevin Conroy, rest in peace. That's his voice work. So beautifully done. But the next character that we're introduced to is, we see the shining light in the sky, and Batman's called to the crime scene, where we're introduced to Lieutenant James Gordon, who plays a huge role in this movie. And like you said, tying back to our source code material, is such a big part of the Batman comic books that he's actually the only other character other than Bruce Wayne Batman that appears in Batman alongside in his first appearance. So Batman's first appearance is in Detective Comics number 27, which came out in May of 1939. And in it, he's like a young socialite. He knows Jim Gordon and is brought to a crime scene. At the end, he stops some criminals on a rooftop and reveals himself to be the Batman at the very end of the comic. Would have been a surprise to readers back then, not a surprise to anybody nowadays who doesn't live in a cave. But that makes all the more importance of Lieutenant James Gordon, Jeffrey Wright's Jim Gordon, being an important plot point in this movie. He's a big part of Frank Miller's Year One. He's a big part of The Long Halloween, two inspirations for this story. And he appeared alongside Batman in his very first comic book appearance. And I think that Jeffrey Wright really does a great job in this movie. And like, we see, like we're talking about, their initial appearance tell us a lot about his character in the movie. The way Martinez goes to stop Batman and Gordon has to defend him, and he says, "He's with me," and bring him in. What did you think? So this crime scene has a lot more to do than just Jim Gordon. So what did you think of all the information we take in from this crime scene investigation?
It's a lot. There's a lot going on. I like at the end of this scene, the parallel between Batman and the little kid who found the body of his father
Yes.
dead in the room. And
Brilliant.
they held the shot on Robert Pattinson's Batman for a long time, and you could just see in his eyes the pain that is being reflected onto him by looking at that little boy who just lost his dad, and like you can kind of see the anger boiling in him as well. So that's something that stood out the most from that scene.
Yeah, to me, that is the best representation of visual storytelling in the whole movie, is the line that they draw from the beginning where he saves that gentleman in the subway or outside the train car, and he goes to walk towards him, and he's terrified of the Batman. Mm-hmm. And then by the end of the movie, this kid who Batman sees reflected in his young self is buried under wreckage in the Gotham Square Garden, and Batman reaches his hand out, and the kid takes his hand and he pulls him out of the wreckage. For him to go from that symbol of fear for even a grown man to a symbol of hope and a savior to like a small child who he sees a reflection of himself is the most powerful visual storytelling element in the whole movie.
Yeah,
it's the best representation of his character arc.
This scene also introduces the detective side of Batman and sets the tone for the rest of the movie in that sense. Which I think is why I like this movie so much, is that it's like grounded. It is a detective story. It's a serial killer story, and it made it feel really real. And in this scene, you can see how kind of smart Batman is when it comes to this stuff, of him finding the spot on the floor where the murder weapon was, and the camera being in the same spot. And he didn't say like, hey, I think this was where the weapon was, like, come look over here. They just did it through visuals. Like you were saying, they had the camera in the same spot of that tool when we did see the tool there, and then they had the same location of the camera when Batman's boots were there, and then as he leaves that spot, the detective with the camera comes over and kind of looks down, it's like, oh, I should take a picture of this.
Should have missed that.
Yeah, like how did you find that? How did I miss?
Yeah. Robert Pattinson says that there's like an element to Batman of being like a savant or like a genius detective, and that this scene tells us a lot about the world and the characters, because it's one of actually the very first scenes that they shot outside of doing test footage.
Is it?
Yeah, cool. And it's where Matt Reeves said that they took the approach of, all right, how does Batman move? How does he react in this world? Who is our Batman, and how does the world react to him? So I think the final product they came out with is so beautiful, because all of the people see him as like this haunting figure, like larger than life, and their reactions to him feed my reaction to him, because them treating him like this godlike figure where everyone's eyes are on him, and who is that guy in the bat suit, and what is he doing here?
There's a lot of tension in this scene.
Yeah, it's so beautifully held, because you feel everybody looking at him, and that's why these small movements of him and creating that character and that physical acting is so important, because like we talked about earlier, it's all on Pattinson, that movement, that when there's a part where he's in the way and somebody says excuse me, and he kind of says nothing. Takes one small step backward, and it's out of frame too. It's just like builds him as this shadowy figure where he kind of glides almost like a ghost or a phantom, like the way he moves so intentionally.
You almost couldn't even see him if that detective didn't back up real quick and say excuse me,
because he's also like a statue.
Right.
But all his movements are with such intent and purpose, and it builds to him being this godlike figure.
Yeah.
It's so beautifully done in that scene,
and he solves the riddle really fast as well, showing that again he's quick. If I had to solve a case with a riddle, it would never get solved. I wouldn't get past the first clue. I'm terrible with riddles. I can barely understand what words mean when they're direct, let alone all intertwined and secretive like that. One
thing that I love about this movie that you just touched on is that in The Long Halloween, which is a comic this movie is very heavily based on, the story takes place over a year. So a very long Halloween. So every holiday, the killer known as Holiday, who ends up being a member of the... Excuse me. So every holiday, the killer known as Holiday, who ends up striking, murdering somebody, leaving a holiday card and a little token at the scene of every crime. It ends up being...
On every holiday.
Yeah. Did I say that too many times? But he ends up being the Alberto Falcone, so a member of the Falcone crime family. This kind of just plays on that and uses the Riddler, but that story takes place over the course of a year. Batman seems so far behind to me, which is a big reason I don't like that comic, because I feel like he doesn't even truly solve the crime at the end. Holiday gets his final victim and Batman just catches him in the act. Whereas in this story, Batman actually takes an active, like trying to get ahead of the criminal, takes an active chase in pursuit in this investigation, and it only takes place over a week. So it's from October 31st to November 6th. If you listen to the audio diaries, that's how long this story is. So Batman solves the case in a week, even if the Riddler's kind of dragging him along and uses him to kill Falcone. There are points where he's not ahead of him and loses to him, but it doesn't take place over a year, which is more akin to like a real serial killer investigation taking place over a long period of time. I just feel like in the superhero realm, Batman comes out looking a little foolish in that comic. But I think they made an improvement in this movie. Yeah,
I agree. I think that's one of the criticisms that I've heard about this movie is that like Batman's always a step behind and it takes him 3 hours to figure out and solve this murder, 3 hours being the length of the movie, that it felt very drawn out. But kind of to the points that you just said, I feel like it's the opposite. I feel like it's realistic. Solving murder cases, let alone serial killer cases, takes time,
Well, the Riddler's had years to plan, and Batman just stepped into his game.
Right, exactly. So I think he did kind of solve things pretty quick. And at the end, which we'll get into, like the city still got buried in water, but it wasn't, he solved the mystery of himself. And found the purpose of what Batman is going to be moving forward. That's the greater journey, which I think is very valuable. But also, the Riddler had a group of like a small militia force basically gathered to shoot these people like a fish in a barrel. And if Batman hadn't solved the mystery in the time that he did, he wouldn't have been there to take out all those guys. So he got there in the way, just in the nick of time. Yeah, the ending was really bad. But it could have been much worse without Batman, which I like. I like that the city gets beaten down and that we don't want the Riddler to look like a chump everything, and that the end of the movie is like this, just wrapped in a bow, and it's all pretty and clean. Well, we want the Riddler to look like a threatening adversary as well, right? Right. So some aspect of his plan had to be threatening and succeed in order for that to work. Another thing I wanted to bring up is that the Riddler had 500 followers. And we have 214 subscribers on YouTube. You're telling me we're not better than the Riddler? Can we not get more than the Riddler? He's a serial killer, guys. Come on. I was watching this with my wife yesterday, and I was like, dang, he's got more followers than we do. That's so crazy. Funny. But we've gone through some of our main cast here. Let's move on to our introduction to Alfred. He gets introduced kind of in this way where he's like telling Batman down in the cave to get some rest, to eat, obviously taking that parental role on. In this story, Alfred's the one who taught Batman to fight. He has a line saying that later. He was in MI6, covert, British military. And so he's the one who teaches Batman how to fight. He takes that parental role. But we really see Batman slide into that childish demeanor when he's with Alfred especially. He tells him, "You're not my father," which is a very angsty thing for a grown adult to say. And I think Alfred takes him back to that place in his childhood emotionally because of being that parental figure. And Batman is in a lot of ways in this story. He is somewhat has that like entitled, rich, childish aspect that people of privilege might have. So that's something he's still, I think, working on shedding. And that's something a lot of people have a distaste for this Batman with, and maybe I even originally did, and it's kind of wearing off for me slowly. But somebody in his position of never wanting for anything, like Catwoman has a line in the movie where she says, "You must have grew up rich," because he uses the word choices towards Annika, I believe, and she sees it as people who are destitute in their position don't have so many choices. Yeah. Maybe she doesn't consider some of these things choices because it's people doing what they have to do to survive. If the alternate choice is, living on the streets or death or starvation, like, is it really a choice? So I think that our Batman is still developing a lot, like you said. And I like that aspect of it. Like, anyone who's going to dress up as a bat and go fight crime willingly, put himself in danger willingly, is a little messed up in the head. Absolutely. And has a lot of problems that he's got to work through. Rather than just getting that crisp public figure, Bruce Wayne persona right away. Like, I'm hoping we get to see that kind of develop into that, and that he finds that balance between the two, rather than just it starting out being that way, you know. Someone who is as broken as he is to go out and be a vigilante, you know, like it doesn't make as much sense to me that he has the other side of his life 100% put together. You know, like
just fractured in two.
Yeah,
completely. It's a little bit psychopathic that way,
right? And like you kind of see the parallel to Iron Man a little bit, you know, because they're both wealthy and stuff. Like Iron Man couldn't separate the two either. At the end of the first one, I am Iron Man.
Yeah,
you know, like he couldn't keep the two separate, you know. And I think this is a good way for the Batman to kind of develop into finding that balance. Hopefully, in that next movie or two.
Well, this is where Matt Reeves' character work comes into play, because he's leaving room for character development. So,
right.
But then we'll go into our next character, which is the Penguin, because Batman's investigation leads him to the Iceberg Lounge, where he confronts the Penguin, and also in that office room meets Catwoman there. But I love Oz in this movie. Colin Farrell, I've seen people say he is the best performance in this movie, and every time I watch it, I'm more and more inclined to agree with them. And I feel like he's contending with Robert Pattinson for that best actor in this movie, because he, even with the small amount of screen time that Colin Farrell has as Oz in the movie, it's, his first introductory line to Batman is "Whoa, take it easy, sweetheart," and it's just, he like talks down to him. He's not afraid of him, and he should be. So like it's just so much arrogance, and I think that he plays it so well, and the character's so well written. Like he talks down to them again when they have him brought to the Searchlight, that floor in the Renewal Project building, and he says, "That's like the worst Spanish I ever heard." Yeah, it's la. Am I the only one who knows the difference between L and la? Like he thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. He thinks he's ahead of everybody. And I think that arrogance is key to the Penguin's character, and our introduction to him gives us that right away. All these introductions, I think, are phenomenal.
Yeah, I think all the actors and actresses did a phenomenal job. Like, it's very hard to pinpoint like that one person that like when they're on screen, you're kind of like, oh, I wish this person was on screen. You know, like I was very content with everyone being on screen. Like they all did a phenomenal job. It's really hard to pick who had the best performance, you know, because you could argue for each of them of why they did such a good job.
I think you can argue for all of these people, and Zoe Kravitz's Catwoman too, who we're about to touch on now. You could argue for her. Her initial appearance is she's reluctantly taking money for drops, which has to do with what we've already touched on of choices. Like she is doing what she has to do in her eyes, and she hates drops, and she doesn't like drop heads. She doesn't want to be involved in this, but she needs money. And she very much lives in that moral gray area we talked about, where she steals from the rich and gives to herself. And I think that she is very protective of the people she cares about. She runs up to save Batman's life. Obviously, we see it with Annika, how devastated she is that Annika's been taken and killed. She's an incredible character in this movie.
Yes. I agree.
Her first interaction between her and Batman is a really, really great scene in my eyes, and very low lit. But the scene in Don Mitchell's house, the now crime scene where she's taking Annika's passport and she runs into Batman and they fight. I feel like there's so much like magnetism and tension between them. Like, even though I feel like you could argue that their relationship and attraction to each other doesn't make that much sense. I feel like you just feel it. Even if it weren't in the dialogue, I feel like you feel it.
Yeah. Sometimes you can't help who you're attracted to. You know, and Batman has that reputation going on for him in a lot of other iterations of the story, you know. So like it's cool to see that right away in the first movie. Who do we see next? Where do we want to go next in this story? Those
are all the characters that I wanted to touch on. That's how we wanted to approach the story, was through the relationships, character motivations.
What about Falcone?
So Falcone, our very first introduction to him is when Batman has Catwoman investigating for him in the, what's it called? It's like section, or below 44.
Yes.
The VIP, so to speak, section of the Iceberg Lounge. And as she's beginning to argue with that woman, Oz and Falcone approach them, and John Turturro just really, I feel like when I think of him, I think of Don't Mess with the Zohan, where he's hilarious, or I think of Mr. Deeds, where he's hilarious.
Or even Transformers.
But I forget about that Yeah, but I forget about all those roles right away when he steps on screen as Falcone and just like caresses Zoe Kravis's face. Like, it has this feeling of like, I have so much power over you, and this feeling of like he is the richest guy in the room and he'll do what he pleases, and he has this strong, evil, menacing presence so easily. I feel like he just blankets the scene with it. And it seems to just like ooze out of him. I felt like he was very threatening, and just the way he speaks is like this soft way. Like, I don't need to raise my voice. People will lean in and listen to me. Like, he just seems powerful.
Yeah. Later in the story, we find out that he is Catwoman's father.
And also murdered her mother and murdered Annika by strangling them, which is a very aggressive, personal, sadistic approach to murder.
Yes. I have a question that my wife actually asked yesterday. Did Falcone know that she was his daughter the whole time? Or was he surprised when we saw her confront him saying, Dad?
I think he was surprised.
Surprised.
Yeah, because the way that he approaches her in the beginning is like, don't be a stranger around here. Like I feel like
I think watching it back a second and third time, you could make clues of like, oh, he knows her. But then I also said to my wife, I was like, well, he probably greets a lot of ladies like that and sweet talks a lot of ladies as if he's very close to them, as if he's a father figure to them, that they can feel safe with him, and that he can take advantage of them.
My first approach was that he knew in the original viewing, but now in the third viewing, I feel like it was a surprise to him. Because doesn't she say to him that she says like, I'm your daughter, or she says something to that effect?
She does. She like introduces herself as if she didn't know that he knows. Right, so I don't know if he knew or not, and I think that's maybe something left for interpretation. I think the first time I watched it, he didn't know, and then maybe this third time watching it, maybe there was hints of like some clues that maybe he had an idea. But I think overall, he didn't, because he seemed pretty surprised at the end.
Yeah, that's the perspective I take on it too. But everyone in the cast did a great job, and I'm excited to now talk about some behind the scenes facts.
Yes, let's dive into behind the scenes. This stuff is like the most fascinating stuff. Like, how are movies made? I could watch these like little behind the scenes documentaries like all day long. They're so interesting. And I kind of already touched on part of mine with the difference in lenses and stuff, and how they used an old, almost broken lens to film this movie to give it character. What are some of the behind the scenes stuff that you want to bring up?
So one of the things that I want to talk about is like the technology for this film. So like the volume as well as the practical filmmaking. So we'll start with the volume, which, if you haven't heard of this, is this technology that Star Wars has used in the past, where they use giant LCD screens to portray an image, so that instead of a giant blue tarp, which we'll see on a lot of behind the scenes sets like Avengers Endgame, where they're then going to go in post and use CGI and special effects to introduce the environment, they'll use the giant screens to project the environment in front of the actors, so that there's natural light coming onto the actors from the sunset. I shouldn't say natural, but actual light.
Practical light
coming onto the actors from a sunset coming off of a screen, rather than, lights from a stage light. And then also the actors can play off of that environment, and it helps them imagine the environment's there and physically be in the presence of the scene rather than a blue tarp. And what they do is they take all of these small LCD screens and connect them to a giant panel to make one gigantic screen that they then turn into something like a Gotham City skyline. Or they're using the screens in close-ups of Robert Pattinson as he's riding on a motorcycle, and they get like a close reaction of his face, and the edge, maybe because of that anamorphic lens, is more blurred out, so they can use a screen there and it can work and look realistic. Then the biggest thing though, where I think it works, is the Gotham City skylines, because I would have never known that wasn't some kind of actual skyline without watching behind the scenes.
Yeah, the place that you're talking about is the location that they meet up when he shines the bat light signal up into the sky, and they're like kind of on top of this skyscraper that doesn't look like it's finished at the top or something. And yeah, you're right, like those shots look beautiful. And it looks like a city is out there. It looks like the sun is actually right there, it lights the characters up really well, creates really crisp silhouettes. which is really cool. And from my understanding, it's very hard to replicate proper lighting in CGI. You know, like they can do it, it's gotten much better, but anytime that you can have practical light, the better, you know?
Yeah. Light's got to be the hardest thing, I believe, as well as like small facial movements to replicate with CGI. The using the volume allows them to actually manipulate the environment with that actual practical light on the actor's face. So an example that they use is if they wanted to film a shot at like golden hour, then in practically doing so, they'd have to film a shot at sunrise and then wait all the way hours later till sunset just to maximize on the time.
Yeah, golden hour is like that. It's almost not even an hour. It's kind of like 45 minutes or so, right as the sun's rising or right as the sun's setting, like right before it goes behind the horizon. And yeah, like that's not a lot of time, you know.
And
like,
they'll literally be on set all day trying to make it work because they're waiting until the afternoon to try and get that shot right again. But with the volume, they can essentially freeze, control, manipulate time. They can make it any time of the day, and then they can freeze it there because you can keep filming that scene for hours with that time of day being replicated on the screen. And it's so, you know, time saving and effective for the set and for the actors. And they can still play off that environment, even if it's not the actual sunlight on their face. It's really, really incredible technology. And they spend months beforehand planning and animating and developing the city so that it's a real world city, because this technology has been used before, but it's often for like an environment like a desert scape or like a mountain or a tundra. But this was a city which Matt Reeves wanted it to live and breathe. So there's cars moving down on the streets, there's lights in the distance, and there's an actual active cityscape, and the clouds in the sky actually move. So there's a textured movement, living environment to this backdrop that they created, and they had to design it. The other cool thing about it is that they can handpick and choose their design for the city of Gotham. They can make it look how they envision Gotham to look and just design it to appear on a screen. And they don't have to find the perfect location. So this technology is just so incredible, and I bought into it. I bit hard when I watched the movie. It feels like Gotham is a character in the movie. We almost should have gone over Gotham as one of our character introductions because it's such a valuable and huge part of the Batman.
Yeah, and not only did they use the high-tech technology like that, but they also did a lot of practical stuff as well. Like I'm pretty sure the Iceberg Lounge was like built, and they had a lot of different sprinklers and water systems to make it wet because it's always raining in Gotham and stuff, and to give it that shining, glistening look.
For
like light reflecting off of the water and stuff. Like that's all practical stuff.
They filmed in Chicago and Liverpool in England, and for the exterior of the location for the funeral, they filmed in Liverpool, and then in the interior they had these giant warehouses where they built that whole set basically from scratch. Mm-hmm. And then they practically went through it and destroyed it with the car that you see drive through the funeral and crash. And then they filmed, I believe it was another location in Liverpool where they filmed the Gotham Square Garden, the interior of that giant stage and theater, and they flooded that with 500,000 liters of water. And I'm American, so I don't know what a liter is, but 500,000 sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
But that's what Robert Pattinson called it, 500,000 liters of water. And so they're practically using all this water, like so many practical effects in this movie. And it's so beautiful. I don't know if you've seen the behind the scenes of the car scene with Oswald and the Batman, but they have like this gyroscopic piece of technology that holds a car so that they can manipulate it and twist and turn and rotate the car, which just sits on this piece of machinery. And then that they can, in post with the screens or with special effects, add in the movement of the background. But it really gives the actor this 4D experience of it's almost like a roller coaster ride, like a Universal, and you're rotating around and feeling the movement of a car.
At that point, the actors are reacting rather than just acting. Yeah. You know, like they're not having to create that motion. That motion is already there and they're reacting to it, which makes for a better performance for sure. But could you imagine the pressure for the entire crew when you're about ready to destroy an entire set by running a car through it or flooding it.
Let's get this take right.
Like if you don't get that take right, that costs a bunch of money and a bunch of time. You know, so like
everyone has to be in sync. The extras, there's so much pressure on the camera operators. You know, it's as if you don't pull focus right, or if you miss the timing of the blocking and miss your shot. Yeah. You've driven a car through the set. Let's get 100 more chairs back in here.
And that has to be a consideration that these producers and directors and stuff are having to take into thought is like, do we want it to look really real and do this practically, or do we want more freedom and do it digitally, to where you can kind of nitpick on things and stuff, but it may not look as realistic as the real thing. You know, like, you know, sometimes we're recording and our camera turns off or something, or like, obviously we're not nearly on the same level of production, but stuff happens, you know, like, say one of the cameras just turned off. Oh, we didn't get that shot. Well, get the car out of here, put all the chairs back, fix the stage, fix the
bring all the
windows
back in.
Yeah. Crazy, huh?
Yeah, it's really high level technical filmmaking. I feel like practical effects are so impressive for that reason. And like they deserve to be applauded for that, certainly. But all that stuff together, it just works in continuity so well and so cool. The screens that they use, like, and I just remembered a POV shot that I've neglected to mention earlier, which is the POV shots on the car. Some of the best shots in the movie, where the camera is held alongside the wheel of the car or over the hood of the car. Like the POV shots are all over this movie, and it looks so good with the practicality when you're actually driving a car. I'm pretty sure they actually drove the car through the flames.
They did.
For the big shot of the movie, right?
Yes.
That's got to be the biggest practical effect in the movie. Like,
yeah, it was so cool. The car chase scene is one of, if not my absolute favorite shot or scene of the whole film. It just gets me like pumped up every time you watch it. You know, you're like, oh, yeah, let's go. But at the same time, it all seems grounded. It seems imperfect. You know, like they're not going around doing all these crazy driving maneuvers that like I could never imagine being possible. You know, like there's no way I could drift a car like that. Like this feels like the Penguin Oz actually got into this car and is driving away, and that he's not a professional stunt driver.
Yeah.
You know, and then even with the Batman, same thing. Like he's got a powerful car, but he's not necessarily the best driver ever. You know, and it feels like that. It feels grounded. It feels rough. It feels rugged. You know, like one point when Oz knocks the 18-wheeler and it kind of the back end starts tipping, and one of the trucks like hits the Batmobile and it like scoots over to the side, you know, and then keeps going. Like so cool.
Yeah.
And then of course, like you mentioned, all the camera shots, you know, the mounted shots. This was one of the spots where Matt Reeves was like, where's everywhere that I can put a camera? Like we're out everywhere on this car. Where can I mount a camera? You know, and like
that's what you do. Yeah, you do them favors in the editing room when you get them as much footage as possible to work with.
You're doing favors, but then also you're giving them much more work because they have so much footage to go through, and they have to piece it all together in the right order and all that stuff. It's definitely a hassle, but at the same time, it tells a fantastic story. Like
talking like you edit or something.
Yeah. One of the coolest shots is like after he jumps, lands on the ground, and the Batmobile like speeds up and crashes into Penguin's car and makes him spin out. The Batmobile drifts to the side, and the camera's mounted to the back, looking to the side of the car, and it like drifts around, and then it stops, and you can see the tail of the Batmobile, but then you see the crashed car in front of it. It's like, man, that was a cool shot.
Lines up perfectly. The best shot of the movie's got to be the upside down shot from Penguin's perspective. Again, POV of Batman walking towards him with the flames behind him. Yeah, the way he just leans down and the fear. But they sold the movie to us so hard with the shots we're talking about, because both the scene we talked about earlier where he pummels that criminal to the ground and the scene of him driving the car through the flames are in the trailer. And
pretty much all of the shots from the trailer are from the third act, which honestly, isn't very common.
Well, the first act shot I was probably already sold on the movie from the footsteps of him walking into the crime scene and the lights flashing. I felt the movie Seven vibes right there, and that was like, okay, I was going to see it anyway, but now I'm going to see it a lot more excited.
Do you like Seven, that movie?
I
Have you ever
love
seen
Seven.
it?
I think I put it, when I talked to my wife last night about movies, I put it in my top 3 movies of all time.
Dang, yeah, I know you enjoyed it. We watched it together not too long ago. It's definitely a good movie.
It's really
and I'm
good.
glad that this movie took inspiration from that. I think
You
it
feel
was
it for sure.
A good match for sure.
David Fincher's such an incredible, controlled, brilliant filmmaker, and he's got a new movie coming out this year. Now that it's 2023, I can say this year.
And it's cool that there's that they took inspiration, but Matt Reeves took his own like view of how to shoot it too, because David Fincher has like the locked off shot. He wants all the cameras to be perfect. He doesn't want it to feel imperfect, like a person's holding it. But then Matt Reeves is the opposite. He's like, we're gonna lock this camera onto the car. If the car's shaking, the camera's shaking. If the car splashes water, the camera gets wet. Like, he wants it to feel like you're in it rather than it being perfect. And it's cool to like compare different styles of how to make movies.
Yeah, I think there's a handheld shot in the Batman too. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty that I didn't notice, but the big one I noticed is over Batman's shoulder when they come to the searchlight and Catwoman has Detective Kenzie, and this kind of this panic of what's happening. They start bolting forward. I like handheld a lot. You feel like you're in the scene. But let's move on to Easter eggs, which I'm sure that I didn't notice all of them, and I'm gonna get run through the ringer for this. But here's the Easter eggs that I noticed when I just rewatched the movie for the 3rd time. In the very opening of the movie, the grocery store that gets robbed by the guy in costume is called Good Times Grocery, which Good Times is a movie that Robert Pattinson starred in. So maybe that was on purpose, maybe not.
Has to be.
Also, the guy with the costume he's wearing, I believe, is meant to be a drop head, which is basically the movie's version of a crackhead, because drops is the drug. Because later on in the movie, you can see on a Gotham Renewal Project poster, there's a picture of that headpiece with a circle drawn around it and a line through it, like no. The symbol for no. and so I think that the costume he's wearing is a drop head, which is interesting. Like, kind of adds to world building. I always just thought it was like some nondescript, Halloween costume,
right?
Strike fear. And then the next thing I would touch on is the cards that the Riddler leaves as clues there. They can be linked to different Batman villains, and I've heard different perspectives. The first one to me is obvious. It's an owl, and it says from your secret friend. So the Court of Owls, a relatively newer Batman villain that's super interesting, and maybe we'll get to see in the sequel. And the second card I thought was a reference to the Mad Hatter, but some think is a reference to Hugo Strange. It's like a balding, crazy mad scientist. So I saw Mad Hatter, but Hugo Strange is another Batman villain who's kind of known for evil, villainous scientific experimentation. And then the next card has a blonde girl, which she's holding something, which some people think is a flower. So some people think more maybe Poison Ivy. I thought because she's blonde, maybe Harley Quinn. And then the final card we see is meant to be delivered to Bruce Wayne. It's just a pair of eyes surrounded by darkness. I had no clue what to make of that, but some people think that since it might be a reference to the Mad Hatter through the Cheshire Cat, because the Cheshire Cat, you can sometimes just see his eyes when his whole body's invisible. So maybe that's the reference there. My next Easter egg would be the Bat Cave being under Wayne Tower is kind of something I think could be taken from Scott Snyder's Zero Year storyline. When Batman's still in his early days, he says that he's trying to remain close to his mission, he's trying to stay close to the crime in Gotham and close to Crime Alley where his parents died, so it can remind himself of what he's fighting for. So that's why the Batcave in that storyline is under Wayne Tower and not under Wayne Manor like it would traditionally be in something like The Dark Knight. And then we see Min and Max, the twins that traditionally in comics and TV shows work for Two-Face, but they're working at the Iceberg Lounge in this movie. I think they'll probably end up working for Two-Face if he has a role in the movies. So we get to see the twins, and obviously Two-Face works with twins because he has an obsession with duality and the number 2. Then we have Catwoman says to Batman at one point, "What, do you live in a cave?" Obviously a reference to the Batcave. Edward Elliot is referenced in the movie. There's the sequence where they're kind of Riddler's unveiling the truth in a way about Thomas Wayne, and they show the reporter Edward Elliot who was trying to unmask the truth of the Wayne and Arkham families, and he ended up getting killed by the mobs in the process. Now, there's also a point where it says in all capital letters "hush" in reference to being paid hush money to the reporter that he refused, and this is all a reference to Thomas Elliot, who is the son of Edward Elliot. He goes on to become the villain Hush, who is also somewhat, compared to other villains, a relatively new Batman villain, who the son of a rich Gotham family. His parents end up getting killed. He blames it on Thomas Wayne and then goes after Bruce Wayne and as vengeance because Thomas Wayne is dead as he grows older. He goes to such lengths as getting surgery, plastic surgery, and I think he performs it on himself because he's a surgeon. He's not a plastic surgeon, but he does plastic surgery on himself to make himself look like Bruce Wayne and take his identity in his mission to destroy Bruce Wayne's life. So that's a very interesting villain. Maybe that Easter egg means we'll get a touch of him as well. At the end of the movie, Catwoman says she might go to Bloodhaven, which is a reference to the city where it's in the Gotham world, because Nightwing, when he graduates from Robin to Nightwing, goes to fight crime on his own in Bloodhaven. That becomes his city. Then we have, let's see, my final reference would just be the most obvious one, that Joker appears at the end of the movie, which
What?
we all know that's the Joker. That's easy to see, and I'm sure I'm missing lots of small stuff or maybe things that I'm forgetting to say, but there's a lot of fun little things you can pick up on.
You have the scratches on Falcone's face.
There's a reference to the Long
Year
Halloween.
One.
He has it in both, I think.
And Year One, yeah.
I know he has it in Long Halloween.
Yes. Martha's mental illness, which could be taken from Earth One. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. And even Alfred, his like backstory and stuff.
That's a relatively new thing as well in
too.
comics.
Yeah.
But
we being like a battle-hardened military veteran.
You're saying Earth One. Is that you meaning Earth One and not Year One?
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't read that yet. I haven't
either.
I have Batman. I have Batman Earth One,
yeah.
but I haven't read it. I also touched on earlier the references to the Long Halloween and Frank Miller's Year One.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think kind of the overarching plot comes from Long Halloween, and then their take and approach to Batman, and also the Matt Reeves' initiation of the Drifter persona, which is Batman in kind of just this like vagabond outfit going through the city, is definitely taken from Year One. And then his relationship to Jim Gordon also is taken from Year One. So those comics are really top tier, considered top tier comics for Batman. I'm not a huge fan of the Long Halloween, but Year One is a great read.
Yeah, and it's good that they're taking a bunch of inspiration from all these comics and blending them into one movie, you know, and I think Christopher Nolan did a good job at that as well.
Something I think you can catch in this movie too is parallels between Bruce and Edward, which I've already touched on parallels in their introduction, but also we know that they're both orphans. They've both been through their struggles. And then I think that they're both very intelligent. They're both wearing a costume, wearing a mask, hiding their true self. They're both going on a journey for their version of justice. And then they both lived in Wayne Manor because the Wayne Manor was donated and became an orphanage for Edward Nashton. And then at the very end of the movie, we see Batman remove the carpet and reveal this chalk plan on the floor, which mirrors Batman's investigation, which was covered in chalk on the floor when he was at one point in the movie as well. So they really draw the line between these two, which is very interesting. But I'm ready to go into my nitpicks if you want to try to argue them.
Yeah, welcome everyone to our backseat directing segment. This is where we both sit in the director's seat and talk about the things that we would change, maybe some of the things that we'd keep the same, or even go over some of our nitpicks of the story. And again, like every movie, every story is going to have nitpicks. Every story is going to have a little bit of holes. Like it's just how it works. These are some of the things that we picked up on and that maybe we would change. Andrew, what do you got? Yeah,
the way this usually works is I'm gonna start with my lighter ones, my nitpicks, and Aaron's gonna tell me why I'm being overly critical. So my first one is when Gil Colson has the bomb around his neck, at the funeral, and it blows up in Batman's face. Why doesn't Batman turn away or cover his face or dodge when the timer shows him how much time is left and the Riddler literally counts down the explosion and Batman just stares face first into it? So that's obviously a small complaint, but why? Why not do something like your Batman, react?
Yeah, to me, it makes me feel like Batman doesn't care what happens to him and that he is completely broken and that like yes, he wants to find vengeance and stuff, but at the same time he's not afraid to die, and if this is that, so be it. That's how I've interpreted that scene.
The way I guess I also saw it would be to turn away, would be to prioritize himself, and would be to give up on a citizen in Gotham, even if it's a corrupt citizen. To turn away and protect himself would be giving up on him when, even though there's probably nothing he can do. It does seem like the smart things to turn away.
Yeah, I think he was kind of waiting to the last second to see if he's going to give him any information. And even in the explosion when he's flying backwards, he does have his hands in his face. So like he apparently got them up enough to protect his chin and jawline.
He's not burned
at
all.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next one. This one I just thought of on my third watch. Why didn't the detectives just look at where the pictures were taken from to find the Riddler? Because the Riddler forces Jim Gordon to produce all these photos, and later other ones come out later of the like captain and everything. There's pictures taken from the same angle where you see people outside the Iceberg Lounge, and later when he shoots Falcone, you look up at where he shot from, and they're like, he's been here the whole time. Well, that's where he took the pictures from. He sent so why didn't you guys just look in the surrounding area of where the picture, like, I don't know how they didn't catch him sooner. He's literally in the same room where he took those pictures from.
Yeah, that's interesting. That definitely
the Batman should have looked
make
there.
sense, right? To do that. Maybe they thought he was on the roof or something.
They're like, no, he's too smart for that.
But at the same time, it took you 3 watches to figure it out. You know, so like maybe like you're in the moment, but yeah, you're right. I'm stretching here. Right? That's a very good point. Like, why didn't they just look up there? Maybe they just thought like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's strange.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's something that I didn't think about at least till the third time. So definitely a nitpick. Then my last nitpick is when Alfred gets blown up, a bomb goes off in his face and he is comatose. Wakes up in a hospital bed after near death. His Batman, his son, Bruce Wayne, is sitting there in a chair next to him and he says, "This is the moment I've been waiting for. You lied." No, like, good to see you. No, glad you're okay. Like, we can get into this later. Just like it's so like petty.
Yeah, it definitely is. But I don't necessarily have a problem with that scene. Again, I think it kind of just shows how imbalanced, how much rage he has and how immature he is as a person, you know? And I think in his mind, he's thinking like, he's alive. He's here. He's in the hospital. He's going to be okay. Like, I don't think he was thinking of that, which is very selfish, like you said, very petty. But the thing that he's been fighting for this whole time, he just found out was a lie. Which, again, it did come from a lying mob boss. But, again, he's not in the emotional state at that point to really put those pieces together. You're right. It definitely makes him look really bad. But, again, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. If they took a different approach and they made him be more sympathetic at that point, I would have been fine with that as well.
Like I said, I've been softening to this Bruce Wayne exterior. And I think that if you look at it through the lens, like we talked about earlier, that he's been privileged and he wears, and that's something that he hasn't yet escaped. You know, it's like baked into his DNA because it's his childhood. You can't change your childhood. So maybe he is a little entitled and, you know, vain and focused on himself, even though outwardly he doesn't care about his own life and puts Gotham first. There's still like these seeds of that in him. So it can make sense to that lens. I just love the relationship with Michael Caine and Christian Bale's interaction so much, like that fatherly dynamic. I hope we grow to that.
We're just not at that point yet.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Like if it was the exact same as The Dark Knight in that trilogy, like then it wouldn't be its own thing, you know?
Now you got to take on my big nitpick.
Okay.
So that is that I think the movie, especially upon a third viewing, feels really long. And it hurts its rewatch factor, which I know is something that's important to you. If I were to make a change to this movie from our backseat directing position, I would cut out the last 15 minutes of the movie. Right when he has that character arc close out for him, he holds the hand of that person he's saving and lets them go out into the sky as they're bay-flighted away, and he's looking off in the sunset. His narration says that he has to be more. He has to be a symbol of hope. That's the end of his character journey. It's a beautiful shot to end on of his face. He's covered in soot and mud after this everything he's been through. I'd end it there. It doesn't give you the chance to close out his relationship with Catwoman, but I would address that in the next movie. And I think the movie just ends so much more beautifully right there, because the next thing we go through is an unnecessary scene with Joker that I don't think needed to be shoehorned into the movie. If anything, could have been an after credit scene. And then we go into the cemetery scene with Catwoman that it just makes the movie feel all that much longer. I think we could have cut some of the fat out in the middle of the movie too, kind of when he's maybe following Catwoman in the car and he's in the motorcycle, and like there's scenes that they just could have conveyed, like her going to save Annika. Like they showed it enough when she got to the house. They could have cut out some of like the following scenes. Him riding on the motorcycle is a long sequence when he's going underground back. There's so much of like transition sequences of traveling that they could have cut out, because there's one point in the movie where he just says like, they said the Riddler wants to talk to you, and he's going from the Riddler's apartment to the prison, and they say that line and cut from there to the prison, and it's like, I didn't need anything else. I know why he's here. I'm sure he drove here. I think that would have been an approach that could have sped the movie up a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. This is a long movie. For me, it didn't hurt the rewatch value of it. I enjoy longer movies, but I guess it does limit the amount of times that I could rewatch it, but it doesn't limit the enjoyment that I have when I do get to rewatch it.
It just sometimes when they're like doing those really long transition shots, I'm like, I got other stuff I want to do with my day. Like, not like I don't want to be watching the movie, but I'm like, going to be sitting there for 3 hours is a big chunk of your day.
You're not wrong, but when you were in the theater watching it for the 2 times that you went and watched it, were you thinking that? Were you thinking like, man, there's better things I could be doing right now?
Definitely the second time. I guess maybe that's a bad turn of phrase, because that sounds
that's
like
what you meant.
That sounds like there's other things I'd rather be doing than watching the movie, but I'm just busy. But which is the reality. But the second time I watched it, the seat was uncomfortable, and when you're in a 3-hour movie with an uncomfortable seat, you notice the length of the movie a lot more.
Yeah.
The first time definitely was only thinking about the movie, but the movie's so beautiful that you can appreciate watching it. You're not thinking that the whole time. It's a gorgeous movie to watch.
I appreciate those transitional shots, at least in this movie. Some movies have it, like, yeah, it kind of feels drawn out. I think, like you said, taking out some of those transitional shots later on in the movie, because it's kind of already developed the tone of the movie, you kind of already get what's going on, you see the world, because those transitional shots help build the world, and this is the first movie of the franchise. But yeah, like towards the end, they could probably cut some of that out, sped up the plot a little bit, and then I would have been fine with it ending where you suggested it ending, right after he realized he needs to be a symbol of hope, he needs to be a hero, and that he needs to change in order to actually make real change in the city of Gotham. I'd be fine with it ending there too. I think that would cut out 10, maybe 15 minutes, making it an hour and 40 minutes or 2 hours and 40 minutes ish, opposed to the 2 hours and 56 minutes. I agree. We did not need the Joker introduction. I think
feels very forced.
Yeah, it's just I've been in the movie, like you said. I've been through this movie for so long. It's almost been 3 hours. Like I'm already invested in what's going to happen next, kind of thing. Like I already want to see Batman's journey next. I already know of the Joker and what he brings to the table. So like I'm already anticipating that. I don't need to see that scene, necessarily at the end of this movie. I think the Dark Knight trilogy did it a little better, where they and we found this card.
Yeah.
And
such a small, yeah.
Something subtle. We didn't get to hear his voice. We didn't get to hear the iconic laugh. We didn't get to see what he looked like at all in that version. It was just like, oh, the Joker's coming next.
Yeah.
Like it kind of built that excitement. I think this one kind of does too, but at this point we've seen a lot of variations of the Joker, and some of which weren't as good as others, like we have the ones from the Suicide Squad and all that, like
Jared Leto.
Yeah, it definitely didn't hit as hard as the Dark Knight's version.
But like we said, maybe nothing ever will for us, for our generation.
Yeah, it might not. And then we also had the Joker like solo movie too, which I think that's a movie that you could either love or hate it, depending on your view. So like since that one has such an artistic take to it, it's like, wow, like I've seen a lot of Joker lately, you know? So maybe a little bit of Joker fatigue.
So would that be your change for the movie, is cut out the scene or cut out the presence of the Joker in this movie?
Yeah, I don't need it. I'm not mad that it's in there, but I would say it's like a nitpick kind of thing. I have another nitpick that came to mind when I was watching this movie again, is that give us a little bit of a scene of how he changes from the Batman to the Drifter and then back to the Batman. You know, like, because he's doing so in what seems like quick transitions. You know, he's the Drifter one moment, and then he's Batman following the Catwoman and stuff. Like, just show me something. Like,
you just wanted more shirtless scenes.
No, not even like him like fully taking it off. Show me how he's changing so fast. You know, like, does he have like a little mechanism that like pulls up the cape, you know, like kind of like the wingsuit that he had where the cape disappeared and things popped off of his suit and stuff? Like, does he have something like that helps him kind of fold down the suit really quick? And then
I'd imagine
now he has that jacket. Like,
some parts of the costume he's probably wearing underneath his Drifter clothes.
Right.
So that's probably what helps make it quicker.
Yeah. So I was thinking that just a small little nitpick. I mean, it doesn't take away from the story for me not having it there.
I know he's very handsome in this movie, and he's got a killer jawline, but I'm not asking for more scenes of him changing. I think he's shirtless enough, buddy.
Whatever. That's another interesting thing that we could bring up, which I know this episode's going on and on, but just love talking about this stuff, is that Robert Pattinson refused to do steroids for this movie, which I think is pretty cool, you know, especially going into a superhero role where it's expected almost to have this hulking, almost unrealistic physique. And he was like, nope, we're not going to do that. And he doesn't even look that fit in the movie, you know, like he looks like he has a very attainable physique, which for me I'm fine with. I think I would like to see him maybe develop a little bit more as the movies go on in terms of his physique, you know, like get a little bit more muscle mass and stuff like that, kind of like Hugh Jackman did, like over the course of his years working on Wolverine, you know, like the first X-Men, like he didn't look that crazy as he does now. Like, and I'm not even saying he has to take it to that extreme, but like just put on a little bit more body mass maybe. He doesn't need to be ripped, you know.
Well, the thing, like, not even just steroids, but there's a lot of different performance enhancers that people in Hollywood use, and I think to attain the physique, a more developed physique than he has now, and that kind of physique I think you're talking about, is something that really takes more of years than months, because we see a lot of actors do it in months because of PEs, and I can appreciate him not wanting to do that and like do that to his body and to do it naturally. So I think first and foremost is the performance, for me at least, and if he can keep himself healthy and well enough and do what he needs to do the next movie. I mean, some of these actors talk about going through like deep depression to attain these physiques. And I just don't think that that's necessary for the movie to be fantastic. I'm sure that you agree.
Yeah, I agree. It would be cool to see him kind of put in that work for that, but I'm fine with how he was. And I respect that he took that approach to stay natural.
And he has time to now, because,
right,
you know, with additional movies, it's years until they come out. So I think that he has additional time to develop the physique more, like you said. And he does look very fit in this movie, but yeah, there's probably way too many performance enhancers floating through Hollywood right now. Yeah. It's not necessary for...
And I'm very into the fitness world and stuff. And if you're kind of interested, you as the listener, if you're interested in kind of diving in more of like the steroid use in Hollywood, or like maybe what these actors are doing and stuff, you could check out this YouTube page called More Plates, More Dates. It's where this guy, his name's Derek, he kind of goes in and breaks down a bunch of steroids and stuff, whether it's people who have already come out and he looks at their blood work and stuff, or people that he's speculating on, but he has a very good base of knowledge that he's coming from, and it's very interesting to kind of see his opinions on how he breaks down people's physiques. So if you're interested in that, you can go check out his page.
Yeah, so moving on to what we would keep about the film, which has kind of been a theme throughout this whole episode. We talked about all the things that we loved about it, and we've showered this movie in praise. But just to recap, I would keep the cinematography, the set design, the costuming, the makeup, the detective/serial killer plot, the practical effects, the score is amazing, the acting's phenomenal. Pretty much all of the film. It's beautifully done. It's, for me, basically a 5-star film.
His suit is awesome.
The suit's so fantastic. The gadgets are littered throughout the suit too. Like, I talked to Sierra about it. There's so many different uses of his utility belt in the movie.
I love this shot of adrenaline.
He has 3 different flashlights.
What a good idea.
3 different styles of flashlight, basically, illuminating tools. The steroids are so cool. A lot of people thought it was Venom when the movie first came out. And
it's adrenaline, not steroids.
Did I say steroids?
Yeah.
And the adrenaline is really cool. A lot of people thought it was Venom, but I maintain that it was steroids, because I feel like it was kind of
not steroids.
I keep saying steroids, but I think it would
Andrew, do you have something to tell us
with these noodle arms? But I maintained it because I don't see Batman using Venom, even though I know that there is a plot line where he uses Venom. Like, your everyday Batman's not just using Venom to get back up from a fight. So I always saw it as adrenaline.
That's what I thought it was too, and I still think it after rewatching it.
I think they came out and stated that it was adrenaline and not.
But
Venom.
like, what a cool idea, right? Like, what a good idea. He knows he's going to be in these really tough battles, and he know that like at some point someone might get the better of him, and that he's going to need a little extra boost. You know, what better way to do that than adrenaline fueled rage?
Because Batman plans ahead, and it's like I said, with the 3 different light sources, he's planning ahead. Like, he's got a UV light in case he needs it, he's got the wand flashlight and a flare, like all that he's carrying on him at all times.
But the movie also shows that, like, yeah, even Batman's having trouble kind of handling these 10 assailants with shotguns. You know, like it's not like he's just picking them off one by one really easy.
Well, like, they hold the camera shots on the action for a very long time, and it creates that feeling of realism. Like, with The Dark Knight, they can use all these quick cuts to convince you he can engage 100 people. But this movie, holding those realistic takes and showing you all the action and fights, kind of like how Daredevil shows you all the hits. Like, it has to be believable.
The opening fight scene. Whew.
Oh, it's so phenomenal.
So good.
Yeah. He's just, I mean, there's a little bit.
I'm vengeance. Oh, snap.
You can upon rewatch, you can catch a little bit of that stunt fighter like dancing, like waiting for their chance to jump into the fight. But then he throws one guy into like the group of guys and knocks him down. And it's like, oh, okay, like, and from there you kind of like believe the whole thing. You can't always look too closely because there's no realistic way to fight that many people at once.
Yeah, right, exactly. But then also, like, if I was one of those bad guys, you know, and I'm not a fighter, you know, I haven't been in a fight with a superhero before, and if one of them came in front of me like he did, all decked out, and he just knocked out supposedly our leader, right? I don't know how quick I would want to jump in, even if I was in a group.
But your realistic best chance is to hit him like a football team. Like,
right. But that doesn't mean that's the first thing that goes in your mind, you know? Like, I think most people's first thought is like self-preservation.
Yeah.
You know?
The last thing that I want to touch on for this movie, though, and don't let me cut you off if you have anything else to say, but the last thing that I wanted to discuss was the production around this movie and it being affected by the pandemic. So the movie, they started filming actual test footage with the actors on stage. And I say that because pre-production goes on for a long time for movies. There's a lot of work that goes in, like we said, the months of designing the cityscape of Gotham in the volume. So in January of 2020, they started filming test footage with Zoe and Robert Pattison, and then they start working on these initial scenes in the movie. Come March of 2020, the pandemic hits and changes everything. So they had a lot of an uphill battle making this huge blockbuster movie. For the rest of what they had to wait to resume production, so a lot of people aren't getting paid. They had to bring everybody back, and from then on, like, everyone's getting recurring COVID tests, and the whole filming of the movie, Matt Reeves is wearing like a mask, goggles, and a hat covered head to toe, like for safety. With the actors, obviously their faces have to be present, the extras faces have to be present, because in this fictional world there is not a pandemic.
So you said they started in the beginning of 2020?
January 2020 is
That's crazy, because the movie came out in March of 2022.
Despite like the pandemic, they were able to get it done.
So
in that
that's
time
only
frame.
like 2.5 years difference, but they had like probably a year of all of that.
Well, it was slated, I think, originally to come out in October of 2021, which makes a lot more sense because it would have been coming out.
Still, I feel like 2.5 years is like not that long to make a movie like this.
They got back on their feet really quick, and they took a lot of work from a lot of people. It's very impressive, especially because at one point Robert Pattinson got COVID as well, which then delayed production even further because they couldn't film without him. So then everyone's not working again for however long. And you have to be extra safe with these things because there can be lawsuits and there can be fines if you bring him back too early or without all the proper precautions being followed. So they had to go through all kinds of hoops on an already difficult movie to film, and a huge blockbuster that to become a huge success with all this trials and tribulations is just really, really incredible. I would have loved for the movie to come out in October because it has the vibe of Halloween, and this movie starts on Halloween night. So I feel bad for them that they had to push their movie to March, but I'm glad they didn't push it to the next October because we would have had to wait for forever. But yeah, that's just something I think is noteworthy and worth praise. You know, that they did everything safely the right way and came out with such a beautiful final product. But despite like, basically this is like a natural disaster. Like it's like an earthquake hit their movie set. It's just the pandemic, you know, could have ruined everything for them.
Yeah, it's already impressive what people can do in making these movies and stuff, and just to have to overcome all of that almost makes it better, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Good job to all the people who've worked on this film. I guess I want to kind of jump back to the nitpicks real quick. This isn't my nitpick per se, but kind of in researching for this and then also talking with friends and stuff, they say like at the end, Batman never actually fought the Riddler, and that for some reason that doesn't make it as good.
Like fist fought?
Yeah, like exactly. I don't care at all. Like he kind of did fight them. He fought the followers of him, which is an extension of his ideology. Like I had no problem with that.
I think what they're missing too, and this is even in a scene that I said you should cut out of the movie, but at the end of the movie, the Joker is telling the Riddler to calm down. The Riddler's like freaking out, furious, because the headline on the news is that it's like Batman saves over 1,000 people or something like that. Because the fight was that Batman ruined Riddler's plans, and then he beats him, and then he's frustrated for that reason. Right. So that's the battle that we're seeing on screen.
Yeah. But to second all of your things that you would keep, same. Fantastic work, set design, costume design, and all of that. This movie is definitely on top of my movie lists.
It's worthy of a 2-hour episode. Hopefully everyone felt like listening this far, but we didn't want to cut ourselves short and do a disservice to something we love so much.
Yeah, we were debating on this episode of like, should we try to fit it within that hour and kind of cut out some of the things that we want to talk about, or should we just kind of let it flow? And we decided to go that route because it's something that we're very excited about. It was our favorite movie from last year, and who knows when we're going to have the opportunity to kind of like sit down and talk about all this again. So we'd be sitting on information almost if we kind of held back, so we wanted to let it all out.
Let us know in the comments if you would want us to do scene breakdowns, because that's something I could see us doing for this movie, is taking the crime scene even, or plenty of other scenes in the movie, and just looking at it step by step and talking about interpretations for it.
That'd be a really cool
fun
episode. Yeah, I would love to do something like that with really any movie, you know. But yeah, that's everything I got. Do you got anything else?
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much for listening. Especially if you've listened this far, please hit the like and subscribe buttons and share us with friends and family.
Yeah, we post every Monday and Thursday this week. You guys got 2 really long episodes, so not all of them are this long, but we definitely enjoy doing this. We're on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. We post our full episodes on YouTube and Spotify and all the other podcast platforms, so be sure to go check those out as well. And that's a wrap.